What's the value add of an auction? Why do I call Doug Sheridan? Why don't I just post stuff on Facebook Marketplace? Hi, my name is Mike Zahrt. Welcome back to another installment of Legal Strategies for the Michigan Farmer, where each week we bring you short 10 to 15-minute videos on legal topics that are specific to folks in the agribusiness industry. Again, we're just trying to keep you entertained in the cab during harvest season. So our prior two videos, we had Amanda Dernovshek, who spoke about entity selection and things to consider on, do you need an entity and what type of entity is best for you? In our last video, we had Rob Hammer, who talked about the Corporate Transparency Act and the various reporting requirements that would be required by that. So if you missed those, we're going to post link to those below this video. You can check those out too. This week, we have a non-lawyer joining us. We're very excited to have Doug Sheridan from Sheridan Auction Services. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be a part of the program.
Happy to have you. And I think what's great about this week is kind of the emphasis on all the partnerships that we have in ag, right? I mean, as much as we lawyers and our egos like to think that we can just wave our lawyer magic wand and solve all the problems, there are some problems that, we just can't solve, and we need to refer them out to experts like yourself. So Doug's family has been auctioning for years, and if you think auctioning is obsolete, it's an ag. We know it's alive and well. So Doug, what about auctions is so unique? How do they work if we're new to them? If you give us the 10,000-foot view of what's an auction.
Sure. Auctions have been with us, I think, from the start of our history here as Americans, and even over on the other side of the pond. And really, the auction concept is really about true price discovery. And that is, how do you price an item, whether it be land or a racehorse or an antique car or an antique tractor? What's that item or thing worth? And the answer to that is what someone's willing to pay for it. And, we have appraisers in our office. We have appraisers every day when it comes to real estate or even ag equipment. But an appraisal is all a history lesson on what other comparable type pieces of real estate or tractors brought in the past. And that's never really a true value of that item. And I think that's the one thing that an auction brings to light over our history, and why I think it's going to stay relevant as we move into the future. Probably one of the most relevant forms of an auction that is used every day is our stock market. All stocks are traded every day, and stocks go up and down based on trends, and certain things are affected by different things, but they also and ultimately affect value. Today, Google stock's worth 200, but tomorrow it could be worth 400, and there's reason for that. And an auction puts together a very level platform, even playing field where everybody participates at the same rules or terms and conditions, if you will. And we offer that item to the person who's willing to pay the most. And you do it in a fashion where it's incrementally up, and you utilize competition to determine that magic number that someone's willing to pay and no one else was wanting to bid again.
I love that. I'm a pointy-headed tax lawyer, and when we're dealing with the IRS, frequently things that come up on audit is, what's fair market value? And fair market value is a willing buyer and a willing seller with neither under a compulsion to buy or sell. And it sounds like the auction captures that perfectly. But what's, if I'm a farmer, what's the value add of an auction? Why do I call Doug Sheridan? Why don't I just post stuff on Facebook Marketplace?
Facebook Marketplace is a very powerful tool, but the thing that the Sheridan Realty and Auction Company brings, I think, to the table is one, product knowledge. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we bring is our experience for the equipment, and to get them described accurately, so that people know what they're bidding on, and to represent them with some credibility and some honesty. I think that's one. The other thing is we know how to touch the marketplace, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that we bring to the table. Is I would not consider ourselves experts in every aspect of life, like fine jewelry or fine antiques. There are auction companies that specialize in that all across this country. That's not us, where we kind of try to stay in our lane and stay involved in things we're good at. And I've historically grown up in the agriculture sector. My family started with running livestock auctions and stockyards here in the state of Michigan. And then it ultimately went into farm machinery and then into land. And I'd say that's the one thing that we bring to the table. I think if you were to compare us to others, is that we're more of an ag-based family business that specializes in agriculture and agriculture related equipment and land.
So when does an auction make sense? I think most of my clients think about auction is almost, I don't want to call it a dirty word, but it's, I think we most often see it when you've had a failed farm operation. You can't service the greenstone loan, you just got to liquidate things, or you've got someone who doesn't have kids that want to continue the family business and keep farming, so it's a retirement exit. And I think it's certainly you probably get them more value than anybody else would get them if a farmer finds himself in that situation. But including that, and aside from that, what are some other spots where calling you and auctioneers like you is a good move?
Well, you touched on a ton of stuff right there, Mike. And I want to kind of break it down a little bit. The first thing that hit me is one of the biggest challenges we as auctioneers and the auction method of marketing have to deal with every day. And that is, a lot of times people associate auctions with negativity, with a failure, with foreclosures. And the reason that is in those times that it's tough, oftentimes people don't know how to price things because the price is actually falling down faster than what they think it's worth. If you remember 2007, 2008, the real estate market, we sold a lot of foreclosure real estate, and it's because we were trying to achieve prices that were historic. And we were, in a sense, chasing the market. And the nice thing about an auction is we'll find the market. We find the water level at whatever it is, whether it's low or high. We come to the forefront mostly in those downward times because no one else knows how to price it. And at the time of a foreclosure, that banker doesn't have the luxury of time to wait for a perfect buyer to come give them their price. They need to have that sold and that asset off their books within 60 to 90 days. And they need to do it in a time-defined plan. Where I would argue the auctions should be utilized more, but aren't, is in an uptrend. And right now we've been experiencing what I would consider a very strong real estate market. And you talk to a lot of these realtors around, and I have to be careful how loud I say this, but they all brag at how they list a property and within hours they have multiple full price offers.
Right.
Well, I would argue that they left money on the table, that maybe they should have auctioned it or hired an auctioneer, because boy, they list that at 250, it might have brought 275. You never know what someone's willing to pay. Mm-hmm. And so that's a challenge that we as auctioneers have to address, and that is we continue to try to educate people by having some good experiences. The one that kind of comes to mind, and I'm a little off topic here a little bit, but we had an estate situation that took place earlier this spring where we had a family who lost their dad, and none of the other siblings were farmers, and they were approached immediately from local neighbors and farmers that wanted to buy that property, wanted to buy that farm. And the family got to the point where they called us and said, hey, we need help with an appraisal. We need to price this because we need to be fair to our farmer to the north and to the south. And I said, well, at the end of the day, why don't we put it in the auction and let the neighbors price it?
Yeah.
And they didn't even think about that. That wasn't even part of their realm of thinking. They thought they had to price it. And at the end of the day, the family has come up to me a number of times and has thanked me for that, because what we did is we didn't get between the seller and the potential buyers. We created a platform for competition. And that way they didn't have to make their neighbor to the north or the south mad because they were the one that didn't get to buy the property. they hired a real estate broker to put it into a platform, and it was fair for everybody. The nice thing in that situation is the man who bought the property knew that in that auction he couldn't have bought it for less. And the guy who was second, or what we call a backup bidder, knew exactly what it would have taken if he or she wanted to buy it. And so they leave the process not necessarily happy, but satisfied that it was fair. And that's probably the biggest thing that we bring, especially to agriculture, is it's fair, and you let everybody participate and compete.
So is there a value to your services too for somebody who is, continuing farming? I know I see it a lot with like second or third generation farmers. I'm thinking of one client specifically where, dad was doing grain and he was mostly just leasing farmland, and the boys took over and they wanted to get into beef operations. And dad was a bit of a collector. Dad had a whole parcel full of just old farm implements. And the boys came up to me and said, "What on earth are we going to do with all that? We don't have the time to sell it all on Facebook. What do we do with it?" Well, you could consider an option. Or an auction. So is that something you guys do as well? I assume you can also help people that are kind of still continuing as a going concern, right?
Absolutely. And that's a great segue. Historically, my dad made a living selling retirement auctions where they decide to retire and then we sell their full line of equipment. We don't see retirement auctions as much as we used to. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually working with my generation, the younger generation coming in with their dads. And we do what we've been calling inventory reduction auctions, which is a small little auction of things that they may not utilize, a segment that they're not going to continue to run with, but they're not going out of business. And again, we try to get away from that negative notion of an auction. It's not negative. It could be a positive. They're selling their cows, but they're going to continue to run crops. Or we've had some people that are going to get out of the hay business. They're having trouble getting labor to handle the bales. And, and so consequently they need to sell their line of equipment that runs the hay equipment. So you've got balers and rakes and kickers, and they're not going out of business. It just is a component of their business they're going to sell, and we can do that for them right there on their site. The other thing that we've started to do kind of along those same lines is we've offered staging locations around the Lansing area. We tried to be about an hour away from our home office in Mason. And we're running monthly consignment auctions, and we try to run them the third Tuesday of every month. And these are locations where a farmer can bring their tractor or their plow or their equipment that they'd like to sell to a third party lot, in a sense. And what that does is it protects them. Oftentimes in Facebook Marketplace, you're forced to put your address on it. And before you know it, on a Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night, you're chasing somebody out of your shop.
Yeah.
And so we, in a sense, on those lots, become the referee where we take pictures and photos and descriptions and put together a consignment sale at a different location where we can handle the public, where we create the hours of an inspection. We're the ones that are having those conversations with the potential prospective bidders, and the seller just sits back and watches it happen. And that way we could sell it to the highest bidder. We send them a proceeds check right after it's done, and it makes it real easy and fun.
That's great. Well, speaking of, difference between Dad's business model and yours, I've got to believe that's changed since Dad started doing that. Are you still waving the gavel around? Do you do some online stuff? What's that look like?
Yeah, that was an interesting challenge. My dad grew up in the live auction scenario, and so did I. We're both live auctioneers, and every Saturday morning we were up at 5 a.m. Heading to an auction, and I thought that's what everybody did on Saturday morning. Literally, we'd go and set up tables and pull things out of the basement and line up the farm machinery and turn on our microphone. And I've got to believe that my dad was one of the best orators or auctioneer chants that I've ever heard. And I might be a little biased, but I loved that. It was high energy. There was crowds. I mean, there was enthusiasm. There was strategy. I mean, it was a way to, I mean, that was the Facebook of the yesteryears. That's where I'm convinced a lot of those farmers wouldn't know when to plant corn if they didn't have an auction to go to every Saturday. And the thing that is changed is we've embraced online only auctions. And the cool thing is we were able to get with a programmer and help develop the software ourselves. And one of our goals was to replicate software that replicated the live scenario, live auctions. And so our software was designed in a sense by auctioneers, which I think was very powerful. And online auctions has allowed us as a company to scale and to grow because there's only 4 Saturdays in every month. And now there's times we're able to do multiple sales on the same day. And it allows a lot of things to happen in more of a methodical process, way more planning. It's actually way more work on our end, on the front end of an auction. We need to get digital photos, we got to get descriptions, and we got to get better descriptions. These people are making decisions based on the photos they see and the descriptions we put on. And of course, we've got open house inspections for them to come view the item themselves, but we miss the carnival atmosphere. We miss the hot dogs, we miss the coffee, and I do still miss that component. But I'd say the lion's share of what we do is online only. And the reason for that is we have a far greater reach online than we ever did in a live scenario. There's times we'll have 8,000 to 10,000 people watching an online auction end, where in a live scenario, some of the best sales we've ever had was 200-300 bidders standing around and watching it end. So we can't hardly compare the power of the buying power online, but boy, do I miss those live auctions. And we still do one consignment sale a year in Mason live, and we do a lot of benefit auctions. We still do a lot of livestock auctions too in a live scenario. That's the one segment that is going to the online only, but livestock is so unique because to really evaluate livestock, you have to watch them move.
Sure.
And you got to watch that skeletal structure correctness, and that's all done on the move. And it's very difficult to do with videos, not impossible, but more difficult. And so the live auctions in those livestock is still pretty prevalent. Just like we were talking before we started with the MLE State Fair Champions, that's still a live auction scenario.
That's a great event too. I love hearing you talk about ag. I don't think you can get out of your own way with your expertise with skeletal structures and hay implements, and it certainly shows your depth of knowledge. Well, so for our takeaway for our farmers, I guess today we've got a few, right? I mean, one is, the auctioneer is value added service. They're going to help you find what's your true fair market value. And to do it in a way that kind of takes the buyer out of the middle, takes a lot of the logistical work out of it. You leave it back to an industry expert like yourself. And at the end of the day, you're probably not giving up anything, even after they give you your cut, because you're going to make sure that they get true fair market value without having to field 500 Facebook messages asking if it's still available.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we go back to price discovery. And it's interesting to watch the trends as they change. Kim and I were talking before too, how some things right now are bringing more money than they did 10 years ago. Like these semi trucks that are pre-def, I mean, that stuff is bringing more than it ever has. And the supply chain has affected things, and these auctions, the equipment is as strong as I've seen it in a long time. And I think a lot of it is supply demand. So in a sense, that's what an auction does, is it brings the market to their items on a predetermined date. And that's really what we can do, better than anything in the auction standpoint.
Well, Doug, this was hugely informative. And I think hopefully what's clarifying for a lot of our ag clients out there is viewing auctioneers not just as an exit strategy, but as just one more component of business succession planning. And not even generation to generation, but as you get from one segment of ag to the next, it's really a good bridge, a good vendor, and not something that you should ever be embarrassed about, and certainly a tool you should be thinking about utilizing to maximize your time and your dollars. So thank you for taking the time to educate us and give us a little bit more background on what you do. We're going to put your contact information at the bottom of this video too, so if anyone watching has any specific follow-up questions for Doug and his group, feel free to reach out to him. If you've got questions on how auctioneer services can dovetail into your business succession planning, we'll put our Foster contact info below as well. So Doug, thanks again. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mike.